Yeah, no cast, so it's gotta be multicast doing this. Okay, all right, let me get this step out of my way so I can talk. So this is, when we talk about Sandpiper Crest, it's a relatively simple budget. It's not a lot of things on it too that are variable. Most of it's fixed, and we've already got contracts, so we're still talking about the same issues that we've talked about all along. They did, earn some income, and of course, we had more houses sell. We're finally fully sold, and at this point, that makes a big difference to how the budget pans out. It can save money and for them in this year, and then of course next year should level out a little bit depending on the way we go. Here's the conversation I want to have with you at this point. We talked about the Sandpiper Crest Park Square claim, and we've also talked about the associate claim. The associate claim is obviously completely master. Sandpiper Crest one that Jason pointed out to me when we were talking is really Sandpiper Crest. It's not master. So I moved it from the master, which helps the master, but it hurts, of course, Sandpiper Crest to have it as a contingency or liability. Not terribly, but it does level out their dues this year to not make it seem like we're taking so much down. And so next year, if we do take it down a little bit, it won't affect it as much, if that makes sense to you. Because next year it'll level out because we don't have the time expense. So this
Timer,
sprinkler timers.
not in Sandpiper.
Oh, not Sand. We're not doing Sandpiper Crest.
We're not doing
That's right.
Sandpiper.
Sorry,
Okay,
I misspoke.
okay.
I
I just don't
misspoke
want
on
to
that,
talk about it.
but yeah, I mean, we don't have that buffer to worry about either, so that's great. So, so with this, and I put it at the bottom as an adjustment, like we talked about the last time. With that adjustment in play, it throws our prior year carryover into the negative numbers by $16,454. So that's kind of important to keep track of, because that's going to make a difference in the dues. So 16,000, if you put a $60,000 item in, it affects their dues $46.77.
Month.
Well, that's not a month. That's it's a month. So last year's dues were 188. We're looking at a $13 increase to offset this. We were looking at a $40 decrease if we don't have it, so that we could see that that change, that 47 delta is actually $33 less than they would have paid last year. That would have been awesome, but it's not something that can carry if we want to keep this as a contingency. Now, mind you, John had mentioned at one point that, if it never happens, we either apply it to the next year's dues because I've got a year before it gets taxed, or we actually make a refund. And that's a possibility. I don't want to encourage it, but those are two possibilities.
Right.
That if it's a windfall because we're sitting on this and we never hear anything. We haven't heard anything from them, not I don't think we have either. So I think it might just go away, but Jennifer did find someone. She's separating the old accounts into the new account data. She's got a PDF. She's been breaking apart, putting on each account one at a time. So the old history from associates on the record. She found some strange payments that she showed me that were made back and forth between Park Square and us being associate at this point, that didn't make sense. Like they actually paid us and then they refunded the money. Maybe they paid. I have a sneaking suspicion that maybe they were paying associate, but they weren't paying us.
They being Park Square.
Park Square paying associate for dues, even though we were told, oh, we're not collecting dues.
Correct.
That's my suspicion. So I talked to George about that very early out because it was my suspicion, and George said, well, I should get a smoking gun, and I'm like, yeah, but I know attorneys that will force the smoking gun kind of thing, like they push them into a corner, and that's not George. So
George would do well in Virginia.
Yeah.
He's a Virginia.
But I've left it in here, so let's talk about some of the variables that we're looking at here. I really didn't add too many things in here. There's some repairs for landscaping, $1,200. We actually spent $896 last year. I'm assuming as time goes on, more things will die and,
We have a bunch of trees that need to be replaced already. The little ones behind,
okay,
so.
so we'll soak that up, but I've also got irrigation repairs and
Wait.
some improvements.
Hold on. When you say a bunch,
Mhm.
what's a bunch? Is that,
Between 5, 7.
okay,
$1,000.
No, they're the small ones. So,
Talking about $200 for the tree and then $100 probably to plant them in quantities, so we probably should increase this, right? I mean,
not the feng shui tree, we're not doing the feng shui.
because if we've got, say, 5 or let's call it 7, it's $2,100 minimum.
right after that.
So I'm guessing that this number should probably go up, so consider that.
I've also had a bunch of roof leaks lately that we'll have to lay out the money for now, but the deficit, the builder deficit is going to. The builder defects, we'll take care of that, but for right now, we still have to have repairs.
we still can pull roof from the reserve, even though it's out. I mean, it's not the best thing to do, but we still could. And so we have in the past, we've done a couple repairs from reserve before you got here and so forth that
And
we've
that was
done.
repaired, but
Yeah,
Well, and part of the possibility is that most of these asset appraisers that help with these reserve funds
right.
put things in big bunches, like the lake house, X number of dollars. But really, it's made up of lights, windows, floors, all the other stuff that go with it.
Right.
So the only difference between the way Encore does it versus the way we do it, that creates a little bit more of a problem for us, is we have a specific item per item cost. So unless we had that specific item in the list, we'd have to do something to change that, whereas.
We actually do, John.
Wait, I'm just saying, whereas in Encore, we use the
Pooling method. right?
pooling,
Yeah,
which means we don't necessarily have to go in there, we have to be sure that it looks reasonable, but we don't get hung up.
so the difference is that we have 5, actually, for Sagewood, we have 5 main categories. They're subdivided with individual items. I haven't been sticking to the individual item if we had to pull from it. I've been using one of the 5 main components that we're actually funding for to use whatever's in that component to fund it. So it's kind of a pseudo pooling, for lack of a better thing to call it, or a modified pooling method, because we're only funding the 5 areas. We funded $43,000 for roofing this year from Sandpiper Crest, and we'll do another $43,000 next year, but there's a lot of roofs there, so that's not a whole lot of money when you talk about it. But the roofing is a very specific one. That's what I was trying to say from this, is that's the only thing in the roofing one.
Mhm.
The general, the painting, the pavement, those have other things inside those areas that are broken out. And the general, of course, has a lot of little things in it as well.
But isn't there a difference between roof repair
And roof
and
replacement.
roof replacement?
There is,
Sandpiper strictly says repair and replace.
yes,
Just like Sagewood.
Right, but I'm saying that when I think of the reserve
Right.
for roofing,
Mhm.
I think of replacing
the entire.
the entire roof
Right.
on a unit.
Mhm.
And that, okay, come year 20, that we're gonna have to replace
All the roofs.
all those roofs inside and out the press.
and partially by preventative maintenance at some point, because they will fail shortly afterwards, and if you're gonna pull them apart, you should do them when you do that. But yeah, repairs are included in the charter, so it still comes from the roofing container, unfortunately.
What
And,
did
and
what
you-
did you just say compared to what she said?
She's thinking it's only for the replacement, but I'm saying it is for repairs. That's what's different between it.
so why wouldn't, so I guess my question is, why wouldn't we, under maintenance here, under the annual budget, have a line item for roofing repairs?
We have a
versus-
general repairs, in the line items, and that can be used for that as well. I mean, the sidewalks and mailboxes has repairs. We have, just standard, general repair here, that we could certainly beef up if you want to.
Well,
Yeah.
may I ask you, John, as far as on a tax, um, looking at from a tax point of view, well, I mean, if I'm going to have an account that says reserves, and I have an account that's just maintenance, is that a different tax category?
Yes.
Well, it is, it's, reserves aren't taxed until we spend them. Whereas the regular account, the operating account, we have to do the 90% test. When we hit the 90%, anything above that is taxable.
Okay.
So if you collect too much and you don't spend it, and eventually they're gonna,
You're gonna get
the
taxed.
tax man cometh.
So I think you and I are gonna always have a disagreement on the reserves and taxes and all that. Because I take a more aggressive approach to keep things out of taxable income.
I do
Since
too.
everything we do is for the benefit of the association. So we just do some things that aren't. Anyway,
No, I mean, it's not my rules. I'm basically, it's just what they consider to be exempt and non-exempt is anything that isn't dues income at this point. Bank fees and interest and stuff is all considered taxable. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to taxable income. But what the rules state is if we get to a point where we've collected too much money and we can't prove that it's only, 10% overage, we don't spend it the following year and we still have a surplus, they want 30 cents on the dollar. That kicked in 2020, and I don't agree with it, but it's just what they're telling us these days.
well, what I understand. I understand your position. I also understand their position.
Right, so why, yeah,
Because they were having companies that were building up huge amounts of money,
surplus, yeah.
tax-free basically. And so,
I actually had a nonprofit group one time, John, that they were a nonprofit, they were doing cornea tissue preparation for transplant. And they were making money, and then IRS came in and took their nonprofit status away and said, no, you're a profit company, you're making too much money. I mean, it's just basically anything goes when it comes to the IRS. It's just how it is. I've never really had to worry about what we're talking about until this particular scenario, because we could have a surplus if these contingencies we just talked about would be a problem. It doesn't. The problem with Sandpiper Crest is there's no place to throw it. Like here, we could throw the money at something that's part of our main purpose pretty easily. Splash pad, playground, all these different things. Sandpiper Crest has literally nothing to spend money on, and that's a problem that would have to be used for something at some point. So we're not talking about having a problem this year. The one that I'm really worried about is, of course, probably Sagewood at this point, because it's quite a bit of a reduction.
well,
We can certainly choose to fund things faster in the reserve. We can choose to do that.
well, we set the limits on it all the time, We do another reserve assessment. And we sit in this area that's got 5 years and we want to do 10 years, we would always do that. We just have to tell what we're doing. The thing that I think that Kathy was talking about was the ambiguousness of repairs and replacement.
Yes,
And certainly I feel like that's one thing that our board needs to deal with as we now are getting grips with everything else, because in all my career, everything can be most anything.
sure.
You
Of
know.
course.
Depending
That's an interesting
on
statement. That on a shirt. I like it.
it's what they call the art of accounting, is what I say. And that's in the definition. So I think that as we go along, now we're got a better handle on a lot of the stuff. I think it's important to designate repairs being an operating expense and replacement being a reserve expense.
And I don't disagree. I am actually agreeing with you there. I really am.
And it could be that we also may have to come up with an interim thing where it says, because in Kathy's example, we can't do anything to the roofs until they fall apart or they reach that 20-year mark. Okay, there's no definition. But the roof leaks. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, there's an aspect of that that's repairs,
Right.
operating expense. But in some cases, it's so large, it can be not enough to replace it, but it can be a greater repair to extend the useful life of the asset.
Right.
So I think that we, as the accounting side, needs to come up with something to advise the board how we're gonna do this for all of our systems, so that when we're not around, we make sure that it's handled the same way.
I agree. One thing that I do know that I did read some articles recently, that the IRS feels that painting is not a reserve item.
Mhm.
And, I've been,
Down here in Florida,
sorry,
down here in Florida, it's statute.
yeah, but
So,
federal supersedes.
Irish stuff.
So I was just reading that article, and I think I said it to somebody at some point, I was kind of surprised, like, really? I mean, oh gosh, so that means that we'd have to budget for painting whenever we did and keep it in the operating system, as opposed to.
So, one of my thoughts on that. I haven't seen in any reserves for any of the buildings, either in Encore or here, a line item in the reserves that says painting. It pretty much just says building. So
Ours-
Yeah, ours,
ours
if
does.
you look here on.
that's
the-
okay. I may be wrong,
Okay,
but, often the building is the building, so you do things to. What I'm trying to make a distinction on is the concept of how we apply stuff.
Mhm.
Whether it extends the useful life of the asset or whether it just maintains it as we go on.
Understood.
We ran into that, the heaters for our pools.
Mhm.
Don't have any heaters on here, but we have 3 heaters in our pool system. They all went out last year.
Oh, boy.
They were 3 years old. And what we found, because I'm the maintenance guy, and the committee looked into it, was that basically they'd been running for 3 years. And they had been running on hot. So the water was being warmed even in the summertime. And they were running all night long. So what they did was they took an asset that probably had more like a 6 or 7 year life, and they just ran it into the ground. And all of a sudden, we had a $25,000 expense that really wasn't in the budget, a reserve budget, until 3 or 4 more years down the road. So, in working with the maintenance committee, we were trying to come up with some guidelines, but one of them was to make sure that we maintain the useful life of an asset is depending on the fact that you maintain it to make it go to its useful life. The maintaining part of it is not a reserve item.
that's an operating
Right.
expense.
Right.
And that's built into the reserves itself. Otherwise, we'd have to replenish it more often and these are large expenses that are harder to do. So these are things I've been thinking about and nobody's ever asked me about recently. But I do think that we're oversimplifying in some cases and making some things more complex as we've gone along, trying to make cash work and get our reserves funded and all that sort of stuff. So I would recommend that working on the accounting system going forward, that we work with our new accountants to do a better job of clearly identifying which is which, and it'll ultimately affect our budgets and tax bill, I guess.
Sure. At this point, I mean, we're tracking it, just haven't had any expenses to lay towards it. The only one that we've had in the last year or so, this was last year, that we applied was in Paired Villas. We did a roof repair that right before you got on board, Associate applied directly to the reserve.
But I think that was because they had to do both buildings of the,
Both sides.
both sides of the single,
duplex.
of the duplex in order to do the repair for the.
Yeah, but I don't know if that makes any difference because both sides are still a responsibility.
Yeah, but if they could get away with it being a repair, or, a replacement repair cost, because you weren't just benefiting one, you were benefiting the entire building.
They replaced the whole roof for $5,000. I thought it was just a repair.
Or
There's no way.
repaired,
Okay.
but because it was for both
Listen.
sides.
4568 or something like that, it was the cost, it was absolutely a repair. I mean, so I questioned it when we were going through the numbers and thinking, why are we putting this to reserve? It didn't make sense to me.
So one of my questions to you along the lines that I've been talking about is, we did this repair, $5,000 or $6,000, and we all agree that it looks like it was a repair. Did it extend the life of those roofs? Because by spending that amount of money on this particular roof, presumably we did a good job. So to a certain extent, those roofs may have added another couple of years on the end of theirs, which would affect how much we set aside. But those roofs as opposed to the others that we were doing before.
That gets to a granularity of tracking each building separately, right? So that's an interesting thought too. Okay,
Just something to think.
no, and that's
I
why
mean,
I'm
something I
pondering right now. Like,
Nobody's really,
where are we gonna go with this one? So but no worries. In any event, I did just increase the repairs to $3,000 for landscaping maintenance, since we just talked about that prior to this conversation. There is internet included in their area as well, and that's because we do still want the main timers to control all their areas to be online in the same accounts that we're trying to control them in one place, so that's why that's on there.
Now, on this internet, is there any way of lowering that?
It's $98 or $94.99 a month, no matter what we do. It's it has to be a business line,
commercial- Okay,
and it has to have a static IP address. That's the requirements, so.
I'm just asking, you're the.
No, I'm just saying that's what it's for. So it's the same for all of us, all of us having the same, having another internet for each area that we can broadcast to the timers. That's the same for all of us.
Okay,
I'd love to get
you know me and IT, I know.
no worries, but that's a pretty good number because that's what they're charging at the moment. Of course, it could go up or down because we're trying to be competitive with the next guy that comes in town. There's now 2 fiber companies in our area, which makes a little bit of competition, right? So we spent a chunk of change is budgeted for just standard irrigation repairs, and the reason that part is in there is because a lot of these sprinklers are in real small places right next to the trash pits.
And people keep running over them.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that's gonna be necessary. Again, I put money in here to replace nozzles with the MP rotors to save water and get better coverage, but you know, that's optional. That's why it's got the red, footnote at the bottom.
But then-
so I'm a little lost here. What are you looking at?
Oh, he's under, he's on,
Irrigation.
yeah, under landscaping,
Just 2 pages. It's not very long.
Yeah,
6,400, he's on Sandpiper.
I think you might have the.
I think you're on the wrong one, I think you need to be on this,
It says
No.
master.
no,
John's right.
Right there, the blue spot.
Right here, okay. Thank you.
He
He keeps talking, and I don't see the number, you know.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of you. I just
Yeah,
trying
because
to
I think we're
move
looking
things
at-
along because we seem to drag
Yeah.
things out most of the time. So so that's really the variables. I mean, we just talked about the variables. There's really the fixed stuff that's in yellow on your page or stuff that we've already contracted for. We don't have a lot of pending things like the other areas because it's a new build, and other than mulch that we've already done this year, we do have pressure cleaning in, and that's the last item on here for a variable. So,
I should get that proposal this week.
I'm sorry?
I'm getting a proposal for that this week.
Okay, but to do for the first of the year, or to do this year?
He's just giving me a proposal, so I can do both.
Okay. The reason I'm saying is we're trying to tier these and then it makes it easier for budgeting that way, but either way you want to do it, it would affect this year being in more of a deficit and then next year having, extra money to do something different.
Right.
so putting in for the 2024 budget makes it more, because of the fact that we did do
Mulch,
mulch for 2023,
Right.
doing the,
we're trying to do the opposite back and forth thing, so that's why I did that.
Yeah, But if we don't have to pay that 61,000 out of there, then we'd be okay. Hopefully we'll hear, because they're.
Well, it's already in the budget, so I mean, if the 61,000 doesn't happen, I mean, No, I don't,
There's
we
money
discuss
for
that when it
January
happens. I mean, it's really we either. You can wait till statute of limitations goes out on the claim, but since there's not a formal claim, what's the statute of limitation?
Right,
You would go
There
back to the
isn't
building
one.
closing is what you do. And if it goes past that, which I talked to George about that, then you just, it goes away and they can't do anything about it, but that's 4 years.
that's a long time.
Yeah, so I keep,
Mm.
I
Um,
keep the reserves on hand.
So so relatively simplistic. So if you look at the bottom line, it's line 113 down there, it says general dues for the year would be 2412 and 201 with an increase of $13.
So you made that
That's good.
change, you made the $3,000 change? And that's still 201?
Yeah, because it
Well,
would,
no, it won't dynamically, I'll tell you why it doesn't dynamically change, because I've already done the rounding on this.
Okay,
And so when I make the rounding, it'll go up about $2.10 or something like that. Not quite, because I had 1,600 to start with, so
right, so it's only
a couple bucks,
1,500.
yeah.
Okay.
Less than a couple dollars change on it, to be honest with you, when I make the change. It's kind of a balancing act when I do, because it changes the contingency, because you change the income, and you round the income, and you have to go back and make it change to make it even.
well, I thought that you change it, actively change it while you're looking at it.
I did change it. It's not gonna give me the actual bottom line the way they've got the rounding one, because I'm close to finals on these, so I've already done the rounding. I've got a calculation for, believe me, it's interesting.
Okay,
Do we want to see if there's anybody on the? Oh, that wants to, or comments? Nobody.
Okay, so any questions that I can answer for you guys?
Do they have any, what does it say? Areas. Why can't I think of?
Retaining walls,
Well, I know we had the retaining
Common
wall,
areas?
yes,
they have a space between the buildings in the back that is actually, I mean, everything in there is common area, the way this neighborhood's set up, to be honest with you.
There's not, they don't,
They don't have their own lots. They have a driveway and a building that sits in the space area.
right, and the overflow parking lot over by the mailboxes.
Yeah, there's a small parking lot by the mailboxes, which is the back of the,
and is that common area HOA responsibility or CDD?
HOA.
everything inside that community is HOA. So we have a paving budget, we have a mailbox replacement costs, we have,
That's all in the reserves, right?
yes.
Yeah,
So all that stuff's covered by that, but the landscaping costs are all for the common area, believe it or not.
okay,
so if we wanted to, do they need lighting for the landscaping?
No.
I mean, like landscape lighting, to highlight it,
Yeah,
and the area between their houses, the way that they're set up, they would destroy that, I'm pretty sure.
yeah, the same way that they run over their sprinklers.
I'm just thinking.
No, he's just trying to figure out if there's anything. that
Things
needs to
that we
be
need,
done
that
in
we need to help improve. And you said, and we know that the retaining wall is already illegal, they should be researched,
Right,
so.
That's a large chunk of their reserve money, their
Yes.
retaining walls is, $3,000 a month that they're throwing at that.
mhm,
So I mean, there's quite a bit going on there. They don't have a space where you could build like a little park area, there's no place to put benches, maybe in the common area, something like that.
In the bench.
And that space between the two big runs, there might be a bench or two in there, that might make some sense, but that's not gonna eat up a huge
That's not-
surplus by any
It's like
means.
$1,500.
You're kind of restricted to what you have now, throwing the money into extra reserve for the roofing,
Let's see how these roofing.
right, and then throw the money into a new budget that's for repairs, which we just discussed that,
Right,
that makes some sense to me.
yeah, especially if you're already getting, maintenance requests for repairs, and those houses aren't that old.
3 years old, because I told them to go back to the building. I now have 3 people over there. I've had the same. kind of-
Yeah, that's a builder's
Right.
issue, that isn't,
And that's the thing, but I can't leave it until Valgenic takes over and says, well, we have to pay it, we'll get reimbursed, but I have to fix the issue.
Right, and if that's the case, yeah, we can't neglect
Oh,
our
I-
responsibilities waiting
no,
for it. to
I
happen.
totally agree, but I'm like, wait
Yeah.
a minute, 3 years, I would.
Mhm. And then flooding inside and the back, I mean, this,
So what we're talking, say 10K into.
I don't know.
General, I mean, just,
Yeah,
to a
what,
general fund, it may not be a bad idea. We still have contingency, guys, just remember that. I mean, there's still a contingency in here of $23,000, almost 24.
Well, that's enough.
That's quite a bit.
that's quite a bit.
They don't have a lot of
Such a small.
large
number.
trees that can come down, and we don't have a lot of hurricane issues here. That certainly could be used for roofing repairs at that time if we need to do so.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'd say that that's a good,
That's a hefty number.
yeah.
No, I think this budget's good.
I think
Yeah, this one was the easy one. I'm so sorry, this is
I think
relatively
it's
easy,
good,
so.
yeah. I'd say you did a great job on this one, except for like Patty requested
I didn't
a
know
little
we had
bit more for the
Lots of
trees.
So it's planted well, right? It's
Yeah.
just-
They're just like dying, they're just now sticking. So
So
I mean,
the
we don't have to replace them all, but.
We don't care about the feng shui trees.
So let's segue back to the master. The adjustments have been made from all the things that we approved at last board meeting. Okay, and it's been routed correctly and so forth, and taking the 60 that we moved from our contingency on this one to Sandpiper Crest, reduce the dues back to $71. So that's a pretty good number at this point. So we're looking at, $36 annual increase for each person. And only going up $3 at the moment. That's also including, if you look at the footnotes, the possible claims and, some extra equipment that we don't have as of yet, that we haven't talked about approving. If we put it on this year's budget, it'll obviously alter that number a bit. And, if I'm gonna say that this number now is probably pretty solid, and the reason I'm gonna state that is because the $60,000 that's just in La Land for Sandpiper Crest is no longer in our budget.
Right.
The odds of us coming out not paying close to the $50,000 with whatever cost they throw at us for the other is probably pretty slim.
Mhm.
So I think this is gonna be pretty close to where we're gonna end up. Now, I haven't reconciled this month. I'm planning on doing it over the weekend. When I do that, I'll update this again and send another version out because it'll give us real numbers for September. Although it's pretty close, there's some things that aren't, dollar wise. But when we get that done, it'll give us a pretty good depiction with 3 months pending, and all of our approved contracts have been put in dollar for dollar as I see them hit. Even the battery that we're trying to pen, we approved $1,800 and change, but it came out to be $1,900. I've already made those adjustments, so. So those kind of things are what we're looking at the moment. I don't really see, this came up, this one actually came up pretty well too, to be honest with you. We have, with this, the way we're set up, we still have the splash pad involved here. We still have quite a bit of room to move around for contingency. It doesn't affect the dues pool individually by just a few bucks. It's a win-win as far as I can see. We get everything we need out of it, and then help improve things again. It's awesome, really. Now, mind you, that with Matt's suggestion that we have to spend the $60,000 in surplus for the security thing, it would change some things we've already have room for. We have $53,000 in the budget left from last year.
Rolled into this one?
No,
No, just.
in last year, still,
Okay.
if we don't spend it, it will get rolled into this one. That's the whole point. I don't want to roll it in. I'd rather spend it for something. So the suggestion was, we still don't have a price for the playground, but I've got a number in there for the playground. We still don't have a price for John's suggestion, which I'm actually highly in support of at this point, which is changing the fence by the pool and having one of those curved out fences so we can keep kids from flying over the top.
Mhm.
That would be a security item,
Mhm.
would appease Mac, and it would appease the budget and also give us more security.
Right.
That's a win-win too, right? So those are suggestions for this one that I can come up with. Get those numbers in and we could probably maneuver this to make it just a couple dollars different from what it is, and it would make sense.
And that's using funding from 2023.
Right, remember that the 67 cents I quoted you for is not per thousand on the master, it's per 10,000. So for every 10,000, it only cost each person 67 cents. That's why we're thinking around at 71 and not moving up to 120 or something ridiculous.
75.
You know,
Right.
savings in numbers, obviously, so economy of scale, right? So. I'd love to keep it, you know, I'm old school when it comes to budgets. I'd love to try to not make them go up if I can. That's my main thing. And yeah, they have to go up, but they don't have to get crazy.
Right.
We did crazy last year. Let's not do crazy this year.
Let's please not. I don't wanna hear.
I'm not going through that, yeah.
So have you had an opportunity, Patty, to contact any fencing,
Fencing, I have not, that's the first I heard about fencing. So,
okay,
I don't know when that was discussed, but I will.
Fencing?
fencing.
The fencing for the pool, she suggested.
You suggested.
Yeah, back, I think we actually talked about it in the security committee at one time.
Okay.
Um,
I know they talked about extending the fencing and security carrying, but your idea to have that, I've seen the aluminum ones that fold out, makes it a lot harder to jump over,
right,
especially if you're taking your girlfriend over the fence.
No, now they're just using this knuckles.
I told you, you're not gonna stop the fornication, it's just gonna move it someplace.
To move it again.
Like rabbits.
Yeah.
Teenagers.
They're teenagers. You guys, weren't you a teenager? Everyone was a teenager.
you know, I wasn't a teenager.
You wanted to say.
No, you just went from the child to an adult. You just skipped over that part, yeah.
There was a park that was commonly used for makeout point in our area that was called Bonner Park. It was nicknamed the other name.
Okay. That makes sense.
Set aside a plot next to Lake Hooto
Sure.
where they can make out
Sure.
and keep out of the rest of the neighborhood.
Right.
Does anybody have any questions online that would like to ask now?
Do we have some online? Great.
It has to unmute.
All right, well, I think we don't have any more questions. I'm glad they get this to the point where we'll be final sometime soon. I will get it as close as possible before we approve it, so that if there's any change in what we're proposing, someone can make a comment then, so. I think we're pretty far down this sheet. I would like to circle back to the repaired villas. Did we ever get contacted about having a meeting with them after
After Kyle,
Kyle requested? I mean, your suggestion, but did we-
I thought Sean's suggestion was meeting with them and whatever. Did he ever come back to you and say, hey, this is the date, these are the people that,
Not a word.
and I
He's
sent
out of
that
the country,
email
right?
out afterwards, hoping it would show them a little bit more of the numbers that we were talking about, because it really is
Mhm.
a great deal that they get for their maintenance. Shortly afterwards, I walked around, I talked to a couple people too while I was there,
Mhm.
and I think it's improved
It has.
substantially. Mind you, we're in
Because
the
I
rainy
had-
season, that
I
helps.
had
a lot,
Kyle's
too.
house checked the next day.
well, I think that since the time that we walked it has vastly improved.
Oh, absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely has.
Yeah.
So I'm a little baffled on why we're still having a concern.
Well,
Do you want to end the meeting and then? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
thank you. All right,